Hi, everybody. Welcome to the session this afternoon around cybersecurity and resilience. My name is Yelena Coleman, and I'm from the Connected Places Catapult in London. Catapult has been set up by the UK government to promote innovation and growth in smart city domain areas like transport and new mobility solutions, the built environment, energy, sustainability, and well-being. I also work as a Smart City Strategy Advisor for the UK Government's Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. I'd also like to introduce my fellow panel members for today's session. We have Julia Thompson, who is the Smart Cities Policy Lead at the Greater London Authority. We have Federico Macias, a partner in the Risk Advisory and Cyber Risk team at Deloitte. Antonio Scarmetta, a professor in the Department of Information and Communication Engineering at the University of Murcia, and Kush Sharma, who is the CISO for the City of Toronto. I'm now going to hand over to Kush, and he's going to introduce more around the role of a CISO within the City of Toronto, their vision to transform cyber for local governments. Over to you, Kush.
Thank you very much, Yelena. Welcome, everyone. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the City of Toronto, which is the fourth largest city in North America. And year on year, our budget from a city perspective ranges from 13 to 16 billion. And our operating capital costs are, capital expenditures are 45 billion. So it's quite a large city, and we're doing many initiatives for a smart city. In terms of our accountability in the office itself, we've established it as an independent division at the City of Toronto as of 2020, and we've divested out of our partners in IT. We have the accountability and the relationship to build a practice that is business focused and aligned, and we've been concentrating on that specific aspect for the last 1 year. We are the 45th division, so it is quite a large city. I report in terms of accountability to the city manager directly, and so that was a big change for the city also, and administratively to the deputy city manager of corporate services. And so that brought the profile of what we call the Office of the CISO to a higher level. And we were deemed a critical service also in 2020. So we provide additional supports as needed to other independent entities, our agencies and corporations, and there's approximately over 50 of them. And then we look at it from a business perspective, and we've rebranded and reorganized cyber and how we think about cyber into various business functions. One is diplomacy and governance, one is threat management, one is digital trust, one is business application resilience. We have urban technology protection, and then we have digital forensics and investigations. So we've realigned to business terminology, became a business unit as opposed to a technical unit. And that is the overall structure of the City of Toronto as we built it in the last year. In terms of our grand vision or a just cause, we are looking at supporting the digital government initiative across the City of Toronto over the next coming years, which has been accelerated due to COVID-19. And we're establishing additional enhancements to the program and infrastructure to incentivize that centralized cyber practice. Once we've set that up, our real focus is going to be twofold: to improve the quality of life of our citizens and to make sure there's equitable outcomes in everything that we do for vulnerable communities within Toronto. From a quality of life perspective, some of our key vision statements in the next 5 years that we're going to try to accomplish are setting up digital identities for all 3 million citizens, businesses, etc. Really becoming a cyber city, going on trade missions, bringing in incubation, and then providing and working with various partners on innovation, and then attracting that global talent to Toronto. Financially, our vision is to become a profit center within 5 years. from a cost center to get off the tax base. And also we're looking to make those long-term investments and partnerships with academia, private sector. In addition to that, to improve the quality of life and help other cities that are smaller than us in our province, we are actively looking at building a cyber reserve where people can get deployed quickly from other areas of the industry. From an equity perspective, which is near and dear to my heart, which is actually frontline services to help people and changing the role of the CISO going forward from a back-end technical function to a front-end full-service business function. And we're looking at two pieces, advocacy and frameworks. From an advocacy perspective, we are looking to build out new innovative service offerings. As a city, we have to deliver something, such as missing persons assistance for law enforcement, helping with cyberbullying and creating the world's largest cybersecurity resource for communities that cannot afford to go to school. We have a cyber poverty initiative. We also have a new program that that we're working on called subsidized cyber healthcare, and it mimics what you would get from a physical perspective in the digital world. And we know there's many vulnerable communities, people in poverty that cannot go to school, that cannot afford to buy antivirus software, that cannot defend against someone stealing their credentials or digital identity. They don't have the financial mechanisms to for example, to get a lawyer and fight the cases and get and reclaim their identities. So we're looking at innovative services that we can offer directly to the public. From a framework perspective, we want to build the first ever cyber equity framework in the world to make sure that everything that we do has an equity lens on it. Second is we're going to work with our partners on the provincial and federal level to work with them in collaboration to get a cybersecurity regulation in place in Canada. And the last thing we want to really work on in terms of a vision to help society is build the first ever cyber norms constitution or declaration that are guidelines for our citizens in terms of ethics. So in a nutshell, and I've said a lot there, that is the kind of mandate for the Office of the CISO at the City of Toronto, and that is our 5-year vision. Thank you. Back to you, Yelena.
Thank you so much, Krish, for those insights. You seem to have some really forward-thinking initiatives on the go and quite a unique take on cybersecurity from a city perspective. So thank you for that summary, and we'll be hearing further from Krish later in our panel session. To start off with, before we go into a general discussion, I'd like to share with you some information around the cyber accountability policy that is currently being developed by the G20 Global Smart Cities Alliance. So through the Alliance, global experts from government, from private sector, and from civil society are compiling and analyzing policies from all around the world to identify model policies which can be used for successful and ethical smart cities. And the reason that these initial policies have been prioritized is either because they've been established as good practice based on experience in leading cities across the world, and also because they're foundational to building smart cities. And what we're trying to avoid with these is being prescriptive of technologies and applications, and rather look at outcomes. So each model policy is being developed by a select task force of experts from very different backgrounds, academia, business, think tanks, all sorts of different backgrounds from across the world. And we've also done wide consultation with various stakeholders. So once the policy is being developed, we've had many reviewers and contributors who've helped us tweak it to the point where it is at the moment. So we will build on this roadmap over time, and we invite partners, cities, and other experts also to get involved in this initiative, either by joining our working group or pioneer program. So in terms of the first policy that we've selected within the cyber area specifically, there are a lot of policies we could have focused on either around best practice or a more technical aspect, but what we've decided to do as the first foundational one is a policy addressing accountability for cybersecurity within local government. And the reason why we selected this is because we felt without the accountability and responsibility, it's quite difficult to have other policies in place. So as a starting point, we wanted to first nominate somebody within local government who would be responsible, and they can then help to shape and guide the other policy development. So just to give a bit of background on why we feel this is really important from a smart city perspective, ultimately the technology used in smart cities or connected places, as we prefer to call them, is this poses a lot of potential benefits to society in terms of having these technologies, but also an increased risk landscape, and the possibility for cyber incidents increases with the huge proliferation of connected devices that we're seeing in the smart city landscape. So what we're seeing is a move away from traditional information technology that's within the clear boundaries of the city. We're now looking at operational technology, which is out in the city, out in the public realm, and it's much more difficult to draw the boundaries around this kind of technology and to see where does accountability and responsibility actually lie. Quite often, cities will use managed service providers to actually do the service delivery within smart cities. So although they are ultimately responsible and accountable, they often have long supply chains. And some of these devices and services are actually being managed by companies outside of the direct purview and the ownership of the city. So we found that often cities don't really have clear lines of accountability and responsibility for cyber. And perhaps they may not have the skills and capability to adequately support, protect against risks and threats in-house. So what we have done in this policy is look at a proposed structure which is focused on some key elements that we call critical responsibilities, and other elements which we call important responsibilities. And the way, the rationale behind dividing it like this is because some cities are much further down the maturity curve when it comes to cyber, and others are really getting started. So we don't want this policy to be only applicable to those kind of tier 1 cities or really big cities. We want all cities across the globe to be able to find something of use in this policy. And to do that, we've had to be quite flexible in the way that we've chosen to write it, because it needs to be applicable in all sorts of different circumstances. So while we consider the what of the responsibilities to be fairly fixed, we found through lots of interviews and research that it is somewhat difficult to name one particular officer or senior person that should hold that responsibility because of the different governance structures within cities. So in some really small cities, you might find that you have somebody such as an IT director with a responsibility for cyber falling under their remit. Whereas in the bigger cities, you might have a CISO with a team of 10 people supporting them. So we're talking about very different levels of responsibility and maturity. So we've outlined in the policy critical responsibilities around security of information assets, physical assets like IoT, devices and sensors, looking at annual or more often revision of security measures, incident prevention and response, etc. But what we haven't specified is who the person should be that is ultimately accountable. And our process of working with pilot cities is going to help identify in each specific city's context who that person might be. So just a message to anybody who might want to participate in this program, please do get in touch with the Global Smart Cities Alliance. We'd be very pleased to hear from you. And if anybody would like to trial this in their city, the next steps that we are going into now is working on an individual basis with pilot cities to see how they can take this policy and adapt it to their particular circumstances. So that is what we are trying to cover with the first cyber policy around accountability. And following this and the implementation, we're then going to be looking at other areas that fall under the cyber and resilience banner. So there's lots of different policy areas that we're going to get into over the next coming year or 2 years. So lots of scope for expanding on that. So we're now going to move over into a panel discussion to hear a bit more from our expert speakers. And I'd like to get their views on how they see cyber security and resilience from their different points of view and their different locations. So to start off, I'd like to start with you, Julia. We have heard a bit from Kush on how the City of Toronto approaches cyber, and we'd like to get your view on how London deals with this topic, bearing in mind that London is actually made up of many, many smaller boroughs that form the kind of Greater London area, and they all actually have a certain degree of autonomy in the way that they decide to structure and handle their cybersecurity. But could you give us some examples of what you regard as good strategy within London, and how do you approach this from a GLA perspective?
Sure, thanks, Yelena. Yeah, I was just going to, in my introduction, just mention that the Greater London Authority doesn't deliver services directly to citizens, so it's a bit different to some other city authorities. They're done by the 33 local authorities within the Greater London area, so essentially cities within cities, which means that at the GLA, we have to work cooperatively and very collaboratively when we think about cybersecurity. And I think I just wanted to make three main points about cybersecurity in London. I think we think about in three main areas. So ensuring that our local authorities are cyber secure and resilient, because they're the ones holding a lot of private data on their citizens. Ensuring that Londoners have the skills that they need to be safe online, so protecting Londoners. And then also probably ensuring that businesses think about cybersecurity as well. So I'll just quickly go through the first one, thinking about local authorities being cyber secure. So as I said, it's services are delivered directly by the 33 local authorities that make up London. So it's important that these authorities have the right tools and the skills to be cyber secure. So we're doing this in cooperation with the London Office of Technology and Innovation. And this organisation was set up to help its members, and at the moment it's 18 London boroughs, the GLA and London councils. And they were set up to collaborate on projects that bring the best of digital data and innovation to improve public services and outcomes. So just recognising that we all share similar aims and issues, and we can get things done a lot more effectively if we work together, and that's certainly the case for cybersecurity. So our Chief Digital Officer, Theo Blackwell, is working with Lottie and the local authorities on developing pan-London support for local authorities. So this is things looking at how they can prevent cyber attacks and make sure they're resilient to attacks that threaten public services. So we're hoping to provide expert advice and support on these issues, and then it's particularly important as local authorities at the moment are looking at procuring or intending to procure smart city technology, but particularly IoT. So the Lottie team at the moment is using the National Centre for Cybersecurity's cybersecurity principles, and then which are kind of high level and apply across the UK, and then looking at how we can translate them into more specific, more practical guidance for our local authorities to use, and how they can assess and mitigate securities and vulnerabilities at a local level. And the second area, just briefly, is around skills development. So the GLA is responsible for the adult education budget. So through that, we're responsible for delivering a basic digital skills entitlement to all Londoners. So it provides the skills needed to get online and be part of the digital world. And a really important part of that is learning how to stay safe online. And lastly, cybersecurity is really important for London's businesses, and also the technology that public sector might procure, particularly with the proliferation of IoT. So we've just released our draft emerging tech charter, and through that we set out the expectation that all new technology that's deployed in London will have the highest standard of privacy and cybersecurity. So I think in London we're really working together, learning from each other, and developing guidance that's practical and useful across all 33 local authorities.
Brilliant, thank you so much. London in particular is really a city of multiple cities. Mm-hmm. So with everybody doing things slightly differently, it's really great that you have Lottie and yourself to kind of try and look at standards and sharing of information and how boroughs can actually learn from each other and try and approach things in a similar way.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julia. Federico, so you are an expert in cyber at Deloitte, and from your experience working in this area, what do you think are some of the major risks ahead for cities, and how can they mitigate these? What types of issues are they facing?
Thank you, Elena, and thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. I would say there are a lot of risks, of course, but I would prefer to break them down into three categories. The first one is convergence. So typically on previous IoTs, like enterprise IoTs and ITs, there's a clear segregation between the OT area and the IT area, and that's typically a safety measure to assure that there's a clear segregation. But when we're talking about smart cities, you can't segregate those areas because cyber and physical world needs to be coupled and interact with each other. Otherwise, the devices wouldn't be smart as per se. So this convergence brings new risks for the cybersecurity of a smart city. The second factor I would mention would be interoperability. So in a city, we will have a lot of actual or current technologies and legacy technologies. And these two types of speeds, when they interact, they might also cause different risks and vulnerabilities. And smart cities won't just born like from scratch. They will be born from current cities where legacy applications and new applications will be developed and deployed for the city. So this interaction also brings additional risks. And the third one I would emphasize would be the diversity. So a city has a huge diversity of technologies, protocols, stacks, from collecting the data on the edge side to processing data and to produce intelligence with that data. So there's a lot of diversity of protocols from the OT to the IT, which means that and there's a balanced reward between risk and reward of the digitization. So this needs to be balanced. But if people just think about digitization to increase their profits, or in this case to provide people with better lives without managing risk, then we have a vulnerability here. So these are some of the risks that I do think that are worthwhile mentioned when we're talking about a smart city. How can we address them? Which I think it was the second part of your question, a bit more complex. But first, and before going and jumping into the measures to mitigate those risks, I would say that today's current context is not easy. There's a lack of specialized resources in this area, as you well know. So there will be a lot of competency between business and cities to stay with these knowledge resources, which mean they will be inflated. So it's going to be a huge challenge for cities. Also, there's a lack of communication between all the areas and the departments that run a city, and in the end, an accountability. So typically, as you know, security is something still seen part of the IT or the digital world, rather than everyone's responsibility. So I would think that the first step is to change minds and change mentality of people that interact with a smart city. In terms of principles, I would say that we can divide, of course, in terms of stacks, we can divide a city into edge communications, all the IoTs that are on the frontiers of a city, the communications itself, so the channels that are being used by these IoTs to collect information and to provide this information for the core and trusted platform, and then a core business platform where you do all the command and control, all the intelligence, where you process data and you reply with intelligence to these IoTs, people, processes, all the assets that run into a city. And in a city, we call assets everything that has value to the city, like people, like technology, like processes. So it's a variety of intervenience in this matter. And this, of course, brings a complex world to deal with. We have been providing and writing some measures that build a framework of cybersecurity for a city. I will try to resume them for the sake of time into six lines of thinking. The first one would be there's no perimeter in the city. In the traditional IT departments and enterprises, the perimeters were really well established. In this case, it's not easy to establish a perimeter in a city, and other than that, it's always and frequently changing. We're providing new services. We're having different people, different assets, different verticals and domains, healthcare, garbage collection, police departments. Everything that's interacting with the city creates a difficult landscape to provide. So there's not a real perimeter. So I would say we need to establish a zero trust framework. There's no trust whether we are inside or outside, because there's no such perimeter, right? So we need to assure that all the identities are really well managed, and lastly, but also important, to assure that those identities are really well authenticated. So people typically need to have multi-factor authentication, for example, and we assure that we monitor all the accesses and the identities of the people that interact and the devices that interact with the city. So this would be one first common line that we need to apply on a smart city to assure the security. The second one would be transparency and privacy. It's not easy when you collect a lot of data from several types of intervenients to assure privacy. And there are specific technologies like dynamic data masking that you can use to provide privacy for such a distributed architecture with a lot of requests, data requests, APIs being provided to consumers in the streets. So the lack of a technology that addresses typically the risk that comes from this data should be in place. The third one would be, of course, and this is an easy one, assure that we comply with the regulations. And regulations change around the world. They are not the same. So there's no one size fits all. It would be different in America. It would be different in Europe, in different countries in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in South America. So cities need to be flexible and have the assets in place to assure that they address the risks of not being compliant with different regulations around the world. So this is also something which is important. Last three would be to assure that all the communications and the interoperability that I've spoken before is connected with security. Typically in the IT environments, we had the traditional firewalls that mostly worked with IP. In the new smart city, it's impossible to do that. So we need to segment traffic by applications, by metadata of the traffic, right? So there's no more this is a safe IP or an unsafe IP. We can't do that. It's impossible. We're talking about millions of IPs. So we need to apply specific technologies that apply microsegmentation, and where you filter the traffic per application and per user request. So it's completely different. So it's a different mindset. And the fifth one would be to assure that all the identities are managed and measured by their risk. There's no more the thing that a user is safe in the beginning and it's always safe, or an edge device, it's always safe. It depends on its behavior, because its behavior might change with time. A reasonable endpoint or a reasonable IoT might be sending a good information, but it might have been compromised afterwards, and its behavior might have changed. So you need to balance and to measure that behavior. So the risk of the intervenients change with their actions, with their time. And if we don't address that, we will take by good that everyone in the beginning is a safe intervenient in the smart city. So we need to have something, a framework, tools that measure and are constantly calculating the risk of these intervenents, whether they are IoTs or whether they are persons. And the last one, and to end my first comment on this, is to assure that cyber attacks will occur. This is for sure. We need to be fast to respond. Okay, and with the lack of resources and with the complexity of the response, we need to automate and orchestrate all the responses. Okay, so this is a very important thing. There are several technologies. I'm not going to into each technology, but there are technologies that are able to orchestrate several departments. So, for example, for an incident response, you need to orchestrate legal department, HR department, IT department. So this is a mess if you don't have something that can orchestrate and streamline the response to an incident. And the last thing is there are a lot of repetitive tasks when you respond to an incident or to detect a threat or an alert. And this causes what we know as alert fatigue for level 1 responders. We need to have something that automates these repeated processes and give them the chance to motivate them and to do better value-added functions instead of just doing repetitive tasks. So there are technologies and frameworks that can streamline and make these replies to an incident much better. So I would say these are the risks and the main points that should drive the smart city cyber resilience. Thank you, Yelena.
Thank you very much, Federico, for your clear outline of both the risks, and also I think it's very useful for cities to hear about some of the things they can do to try and mitigate that, because it is extremely complex, as you mentioned, and it's difficult to understand and draw those boundaries. It's useful to look at some kind of risk management and post-incident response procedures. So a lot of good food for thought there in terms of what can be done to try and prepare as much as possible against what is probably becoming an increasingly likely thing to occur. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So Antonio, at the UMU, you are working closely with the city of Murcia, and also you're working within the EU project called CyberSec for Europe. From your perspective, what do you think that a city can do from a technical point of view to try and prepare for threats and attacks? So I suppose a similar question to Federico, but from your experience, what are some of the things that they can focus on?
Thanks, first of all, for the invitation, and I think it's good that I am behind Federico, because some of the points that basically we are working on are quite close related to what already he presented in that sense. So in that sense, as you mentioned, basically I'm working with the city of Murcia that already have a project, a platform basically that is being deployed for the smart city that cover basically several verticals, I would say, of the city. And what we are trying now is also to bring the experience and the issues, and the threats that we are detecting as part of this deployment to the CyberSec for Europe project, where there we are sharing also some experience with other cities, because there's a vertical activity on CyberSec for Europe that is touching security on smart city scenarios. And there we are also involved Genova, and it's also Porto being involved. And basically one of the things that we are trying, as I mentioned there, is to try to identify several areas we understand have some priority when we are talking about deploying a smart city solution in that sense. So one of them already was mentioned, is all the aspect regarding the connection on all the integration, I would say, of the legacy systems or the operational technology that already exists in the cities. And I would say with new technologies, like it could be IoT, but also 5G. 5G will have a lot of impact also on cities, because they will allow to create a lot of new areas of data, I would say, the integration, I would say, in some sense. This is one aspect. So basically there where we are trying to identify what could be the main, I would say, security enablers that need to be put in place in order to manage basically all the aspect of connectivity, of communication, obviously, but also for as already was said, also for the orchestration of the different services. Because at the end, when you're talking about a solution for a city, you normally are issues that are affecting different verticals in some sense. So you need to create a way to orchestrate the solution between the different verticals in order to provide the solution for the citizen, or to solve any issue that you are having in the city in that sense. The second area where we are quite involved is in the area of exactly of identity management solution that can be integrated on a smart city platform, but specifically focus on the area also of the privacy preserving. Our understanding is that privacy, all the aspects that are touching privacy now are becoming more and more important. Also, the citizen and the user in general are more aware of these needs that they can have, or the in this case the right that they can have about managing their privacy. And the point here is that we need to be able to really offer solutions that in the platform could easily facilitate to manage all the different privacy aspects that are in the interaction between the citizens and the city in different ways. No? And for that, we are developing and designing, I would say, solutions that take into account this. Not only affecting but also for persons, I would say, but also taking into account the impact of IoT, because at the end also IoT are other elements that need to be taken into account also when as a way to share information, and in some way that you need to provide mechanisms to provide a certain privacy about the information they are sharing in that sense. And linked to this one, also the other element is that also how this process of data sharing that is happening in the city should be compliant with GDPR, specifically in our case. No? So at the end, that if you are asking data to any entity, so how they can be compliant with GDPR, if you need the consent, how you are able to launch all the consent mechanisms in a way that is mostly automatic. So and how this can be integrated on the service of the city at the end, where many of these aspects are taken into account. And finally, one of the last elements that we are looking for is specifically the connection of incident management, because at the end, these are things to preserve, I would say, or to reduce the threat, but normally they will happen in any case. So if they happen, how to be able to react, basically, how to share, I would say, this incident situation, and for that, for example, how to integrate solution like data sharing platform for incident management with the smart city platform as one of another enablers that it can be part of that solution. And so basically, these are the three main areas where we are trying to focalize, I would say, the work that we are having as part of this CyberSec for Europe project.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Antonio. We are nearing the end of our session today, so I have one last question which I'd like to direct again to you, Kush. As we've heard from most of the panel members today, unfortunately, cyber incidents are looking like they're going to be a part of smart cities going forward, and it's something which we do need to take into account and manage. But what we want to try and do is move from something reactive, so just trying to put out fires as and when they occur. How do you feel that cities might be able to move from that kind of position to a position of overall greater resilience? So what kind of things can they put in place to go from kind of just reacting to what's happening in the moment should an attack or an incident occur, to a position where they feel more resilient and secure in where they are?
Thank you. I'm going to answer that from the topic of the day, is the accountability policy. And so I think that's key. And we've helped with our colleagues around the world to draft that, which actually gives the centralized authority to that individual, whether it's the small or larger cities. And that specific accountability allows CISOs or the equivalent to make the key decisions during times of crisis, where they don't have to try to negotiate things with their partners in IT and the business, the clerk's office, etc. So looking at this policy and trying to implement, I think, is the first step. That helps us alleviate any specific risk in terms of collaboration. It allows us to make those final decisions. It allows us to have those ad hoc reporting relationships from other teams, whether it's the business or IT, report directly into the CISO during times of crisis. And then the other thing that team members should keep in mind is we're also now looking at the Office of Emergency Management at the City of Toronto, and we are going to integrate cybersecurity as an emergency, just like a flood, just like a power outage, just like riots, etc. fires. And so we're working on that. And we are trying to leverage what is already established. So that would be, another point of advice is if your city has specific building blocks already there within the various departments or divisions, take hold of those, integrate into them, right? And you could quickly respond. The technology, I think my colleagues have covered, right? You need some of the technologies, you need that foundation so you could respond. In our case, what we've done, because we have a smaller team and we're growing rapidly, we have outsourced that risk for the managed security for the response. And we have world-class assistants like CrowdStrike and others that are helping us through that in the case that we have a breach. So we've put in the foundation of key specific relationships external across the world so that we can respond to that attack in addition to the policy.
Thank you so much, Chris. Right, I'd like to thank everybody on the panel very much for your insights today. And thank you for joining us, everybody, on this session. And I hope you will enjoy the rest of the panels and interesting topics that are on between now and Friday.